Let's talk about what to expect out of Albany and Governor Cuomo in 2021. Steve Greenberg is the former press secretary for Comptroller Carl McCall and two Assembly speakers. He now runs Greenberg Public Relations. And Bob Bellafiore was the first press secretary for Governor George Pataki. He is a founder of Stanhope Partners. Thank you both for joining me.
Great to be with you.
So let's start with the legislature, because as in 2018, we have a new wave of lawmakers coming into the legislature. And it's going to be kind of a big shift in the Assembly, where we have seen a lot of Democratic Socialist candidates elected to the Assembly. In the Senate, we didn't have so many openings, but we do have more Democrats coming in. Steve, I want to go to you first, because I think that with Democrats in control in both chambers now, but having new members coming in, the dynamics might shift a little bit. So tell me how you see this playing out in the legislature. Are we going to see something different next year in terms of ideology and the way that they work, as opposed to last year? And maybe 2019 is probably a better example because we weren't dealing with COVID at the time.
Yeah, I mean, look, 2021, we are certainly for the legislative session that begins in just a few days and will run through the first half of the year. We are still going to be very much in a COVID environment. So how the legislature is going to act, how they're going to react and interact with Governor Cuomo is still, an open question. But a lot of new members, which really puts pressure on the leaders. Speaker Hasty in the Assembly, Majority Leader Stuart Cousins in the Senate. Because as the leaders, what they have to do is manage their conferences. They've got to manage very conservative Democrats, moderate Democrats, progressive Democrats, and Democrats even further to the left than that. So they have to bring it together so that they can get things passed. So the real pressure is going to be on the leaders to deal with these new members and see how they bring their conferences together.
Bob, in some ways, is this an opportunity for Democrats to seize onto these really far left members coming into the Assembly and the Senate and kind of saying to their voters, look, there's these radical ideas and they're going to impact you? And could that help them politically in 2022?
Well, Steve hits on a really good point about the challenge this creates for the leadership. But let's look at where these new members come from. These are very activist members. They've come up through politics at a different time when perhaps bombast was more highly valued than, say, a political philosophy or experience in government. So they come with a different kind of character, and the dynamic can be very different, and actually more of a challenge for the legislative leaders than an opportunity. If they're good, they'll make it. They'll make it work. But you've already seen this in the Senate in the last 2 years. You have members who are unafraid to throw rocks at the governor and look forward to doing it. That makes things that can make things difficult, and we'll have to see how they manage it. Of course, being socially distant will add to that, but the real dynamic is the personalities, and that's the challenge that comes up because of how these new members come up, and tremendous turnover in the Assembly in the last 4 cycles. So a lot of these new members come up that are much more like Ocasio-Cortez than they are like Governor Cuomo, who's a very old-style politician.
Right. I spoke to. Sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was going to say, although there's a mixture of both, because some of the new senators are coming from Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse, as well as some new members from New York City who I think are the ones you were talking about, Bob. But the other factor that works to the leaders' advantage in being able to manage as we move into 2021 is they both have huge majorities. There's 107 Assembly Democrats. You need 76 votes to pass a bill in the Assembly. There are now going to be 43 Senate Democrats or 42 Senate Democrats, and you only need 32 to pass a bill. So the leaders have some flexibility for, some of the members who may go off the reservation, as it were, on some issues.
Right. I was speaking to Democratic Party Chairman Jay Jacobs earlier in December when he was in Albany for the Electoral College vote, and he had some interesting things to say about socialist candidates versus progressive candidates. So let's take a look at that clip.
There's a big difference between being a socialist and being a progressive. Governor and most of the legislature, the Democrats anyway, are progressives. And there's a very different agenda there. And people need to understand that. And they need to understand what the socialist agenda really is. And when they do, I don't think it's going to have the support at the level it currently has.
So that seems to be an indication from the party chairman in New York that Democrats in New York it's really a big tent. Steve, is there this shift in the Democratic Party, and what does that mean for politics at the state capitol? It seems like there are almost three parties there: Republicans, Democrats, and people elected that are supported by the Democratic Socialist Party.
Look, I mean, that I don't think that's really the case. I think I've been working, in and around Albany and state government for 40 years now. And I remember back in the 80s, there were the Democrats talking about the big tent party. They have members on the far left and members on the far right. And it's true to a certain extent, maybe a little bit lesser extent on the Republican Party, too. They have mainstream Republicans and right-wing fringe Republicans. Well, I think we need to put the labels aside, and what the leaders, the governor, the legislative leaders should focus on, rather than worrying about the labels, is coming up with legislation that work for their constituents and that have the support of their constituents, and then pass it regardless of the label.
Bob, what about the Republican Party? As you and Steve have said, the Democrats are coming back to Albany with more seats than last year, more seats than we've certainly seen in a long time, meaning that Republicans are now in a very slim minority in the Senate, meaning they don't have as much of a voice. Where does the party go from here? How do they gain it back? And how does that change their strategy in Albany?
Well, the Republicans gaining power back in the Senate may be just an old question because of the demographics of a lot of the districts. And then once redistricting is done, it'll be made even more difficult. I think what they need to learn how to do is how to be a very vocal and thoughtful party of ideas. If I were Rob Ortt, the Senate leader, who I'm not, what I would point out from Jay Jacobs' comment is what Jacobs has told you is that the Democratic Party has a far left and a further left, which is what he's saying. There's nothing in his comment, maybe it came up elsewhere in your conversation, where he talked about moderate Democrats and right of center Democrats. That's a big tent party. But if Jay Jacobs is talking about far left and further left, then that's not the kind of Democratic Party or conferences that is going to live up to the standard that Steve set, which is finding legislation and solutions that are going to be good for constituents. Because if there's one thing we know is that the answers are never on the extremes. And the progressives, as they have defined themselves in New York, are on the extreme. The socialists are off the extreme. The same thing with, conservative, very conservative Republicans and, right-wing Trumpy Republicans. The answers are never on the outside. They're always towards the middle.
Before I let both of you go, just one last word from each of you. How do you predict this next year's session is going to go? We're all virtual. People seem divided more than ever. So let's go to you first, Steve. How do you think it's going to play out?
I think it's going to be a rough year, mainly because of the fiscal crisis that the state is facing. And we don't know what, if anything, New York will get from the feds in the coming year under the Biden administration, with a very closely divided Congress, regardless of the outcome in Georgia. So I think it's going to be a lot of battling over how much can we avoid cutting programs that people like: education, transportation, healthcare. I think it's all going to be about the fiscal issues, and it's going to be a really tough session, I believe.
Bob, last word.
I think Steve is right in identifying the fiscal issues. In Albany, we always like to talk about the big bill called the big ugly. This year, it's going to be called the big beg, because they have made no decisions this year to deal with the financial issues that have only been building. And it's going to be begging Washington. These guys are going to be walking down I-95 on their knees to Congress to try to get money. And if the Republicans hold those seats in Georgia, it's going to be a long walk back.
All right. Appreciate your analysis. Steve Greenberg and Bob Belfiore, thanks as always.
Good holidays.
Dan. Happy New Year.